Girl Scouts. My name is Rachel Wells. I'm a program and partnerships manager with the Girl Scouts of Western Ohio. Um, I'm going to wait a little. Are going to be working on the Cadette Book Artist badge. We're just going to need some paper. We're going to need some needle and thread. Something to cut with, so scissors, if you have an X-Acto knife, something like that. And we're going to learn a little bit about bookmaking today, and we are going to make our own text block is what it's called. And so that is the starting point for making a book. And what have a really cool book that you you just think it looks kind of cool. You know, it doesn't even have to be your favorite story. I have a great example here, and we'll talk a little bit about the live, but I really like this copy of Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles, as well as a couple of his other short stories too. It's a really pretty book. Make sure you have all your stuff prepped too, so all of your supplies for the bookmaking. I, of course, have paper right here. I'm using a drawing paper because it's a little bit thicker, but you can use a computer paper too, and that should be okay. So my favorite book is probably, it's a novel by Kurt Vonnegut. It's called Slaughterhouse-Five, so it's a little bit of an older book. But it's a really good book. There are a couple of parts of this badge. So step one of the badge is talking about finding a book collection. I'm going to show you guys some of my favorite books and what they look like. And then I'll also put in the comments below, there is a really cool video that I found of a Japanese book artist who restores a dictionary. And it's really cool to see that process and kind of that emotional response we can sometimes have to our favorite books. I know my favorite books are books that are a little bit more beat up, that might be dog-eared on the edges, because it shows a lot of love. You know, whoever had that book before me, you know, really appreciate it. So I like to get used books a lot of the time. So we're going to get started. So again, my name is Rachel Wells. I am a program and partnerships manager in Toledo, Ohio. So that's right there at the top of Ohio. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the books I have in my collection today. We're going to talk about the difference between softcover and hardcover books. And then I'm going to teach you guys how to make something called a text block, which is the first step to making your own book. I will post in the comments as well some videos on how to make a hardcover so you guys can make a hardcover too. But just because of the time limitations we have today, I'm really just going to show you guys how to make that text block portion. And then you guys will be able to follow up with some of the content that I post in the comments. So the first thing I want to do is show some of the books that I have, and we're going to look at some of the characteristics of these books. You know, we're going to think about how they're constructed. That's kind of part of this badge, is to think about how books are made. There's really a artisan quality to how books are made. Traditionally, you know, paper was made with a printing press, and there was a lot more, you know, manual labor involved with this. So sometimes you'll see these really beautiful things called illuminated manuscripts. That monks would actually dedicate their lives to creating these really awesome, gorgeous books. So I really recommend looking into things like illuminated manuscripts, kind of the history of bookmaking and where that really comes from. So in my collection, I kind of showed this earlier. This is one of my favorite books. I like old weathered books, but I like books that are just kind of uniquely made. So this is Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles. It is a collection of science fiction short stories. When you guys get to high school, you guys might actually read this book. We read it in high school, but I'd actually read it before high school because I was already a big Ray Bradbury fan. I really like this book for a couple of reasons, just like construction speaking, not even story speaking. Because it's hardcover, I tend to like a hardcover book. They're a little bit heavier to hold, they're harder to pack into things, but that's okay. It has these really gorgeous gilded edges on it too. I know there are a lot of like religious texts, like sometimes Bibles will also have this too. There's that really gorgeous intimate detail put onto books. And I also like this book because it has a ribbon insert. So I never have to look for a bookmark. I can always have a bookmark right here. So this is a hardcover book. When we look at the construction, if you guys have your hardcover books in front of you, we can see right here, do you guys see how there's that piece of cloth that the string is attached to, as well as all of the pages of the book? That's your text block in there. So that's the basis of the book. So there's the text block on the inside and the cover on the outside of it. And it is attached, as you guys can kind of see, there's this piece of paper that they've glued over to attach the text block to the book's actual binding, the book's actual cover for it. So the way that that would be made is there, you can kind of see the cloth and stitching that goes angle it that way, cloth and stitching that goes into there. And we're gonna learn that technique of actually hand stitching our pages to make a book out of. So for something like this is a art book. It is Hokusai. Hokusai is a really well-known Japanese printmaker. If you've ever seen the Japanese woodblock print that is the ocean waves, then that is Hokusai. Hokusai is very well known. This is actually going to be a softcover book, but what I really like about this softcover book that's a little bit different than, say, this magazine I have here. So you guys can kind of see with the magazine, we see where that text block is glued to the outside pages, but there's no stitching in here. This is going to be all glue, so it's not stitched in any way. It's just kind of glued in there. While something like this, while it's, you know, it's a soft cover, but it has a little bit more structure to it, they actually stitched this one as well. So you guys can kind of see that stitching, which just makes the book a little bit sturdier. When you stitch it like that, you'll actually put glue on the outside too of it to create that binding. We won't be doing the glue today, but I am posting a video so you guys will be able to glue the binding of your books. So, and those are just a couple of different examples. Here's another book that I have. This is an art book by an artist named James Jean. You guys will notice that I tend to do the art videos and things like that. I have a lot of art books. So this one's a little bit more beat up. Unfortunately, it actually came, see if I can find it. It came damaged from Amazon, which was a really big bummer. You know, but I did a little bit of book repair, a little bit of glue and fixed it up. So we're going to now move into the activity portion of this video. So we saw a book collection. I'm also going to post a video for you guys to watch that I think is a really cool and touching video about how books make us feel, how books can be a family heirloom and passed down. You know, is there a Bible in your family that might have been your grandparents that now maybe your parents have? Is there a book collection that, you know, has been passed down through your family? So think about like the history of books and their meaning to us in that way. So we're working on step 3 now, which we're actually going to make our own book. So I'm going to angle this away so you won't be seeing my face as much, but you'll see my hands. So we're going to angle down just like that so you guys can see my work surface. So we are going to do something called kettle stitch, which is just a type of bookbinding. It's pretty simple to do. If you've sewn before, you will feel a little bit more comfortable with this. I'm also going to post a video with information on how to do this. That might be a little bit easier to see. But the way that we make books is we have to have a couple of items with us. So I have here a ruler. This is just like a little ruler. I really like this one. This is actually an architect's ruler. It's made out of metal. It's really sturdy. It fits in a lot of places. And I chose this one in part because it's 6 inches long. And my page length, my page width really, is 6 inches right here. So it lines up perfectly. It makes it very easy for me to be able to use this. So you'll start with your paper. I would recommend if you have a big sheet of paper to cut that sheet of paper in half and then measure that. See how long that is. It'll help with measurements later. So what we're going to do first is we're going to make something called signatures. And what signatures are, let me grab, I already pre-made a little book block for us. So you guys can kind of see there's the stitching in our book block right there. And so these text blocks are made predominantly out of something called signatures. And what a signature is when it comes to bookbinding is not someone signing something. It is actually a collection of pages. So for this one here, I found it easiest to do just 2. So I have 2 sheets of paper that I have folded in half to make 1 signature. And this just makes it so that when you're actually sewing these pages in, it's not going to take forever. You're not doing an individual page. It makes it sturdier too. It means that when you sew, there's less likelihood of you ripping the paper because you have a little bit of, you know, stacking it makes it stronger. So having a couple of pages will make it a little bit stronger. So I have a stack of already pre-folded, pre-punched signatures, but I'm going to show you guys how to make a signature, and then we're going to learn how to stitch our signatures together. So I have my 2 sheets of paper that I'm going to make into a single signature right here. And when you bind a book like this, you'll need a couple of tools, and there's a couple of tools that you don't technically need, but might make the job a little bit easier. So traditionally in bookbinding, artists would use something called a bone folder. which is exactly what it sounds like. It is predominantly made out of animal bone. It is a long, sturdy. It has like a little point to the end, but it's not a sharp point. I wish I had one, but unfortunately, our local art store supply shop is closed right now, so I couldn't purchase one. But you don't need an actual bone folder to do this. You really just need something that is going to, when you make a fold with your pages, going to get rid of the seams on it. So sometimes when you fold something, if you notice those little craggy folds almost, a bone folder is going to prevent that. So what I have instead is actually, it's just a round little, it's a like milk makeup. It's a mascara tube, but it's smooth all the way around. And I found this actually works really well. So find something smooth. You could probably use something like your ruler too. The only reason I didn't want to use the ruler is because these edges are a little bit, not sharp, but they might catch the page. So something smooth like this is perfect. When we fold, we want to make sure that our folds are really tight and neat. So what I recommend when you fold, and this is with anything, but especially with making books, we want really clean edges to our folds. We want them to lay really nice. We want them to be even. So it might seem silly to invest this much time into folding things, but when I fold, I take my top and very gently line it up so that it is even right there, which seems pretty self-explanatory. What I do next, though, is a little bit different. And instead of, pushing forward on it to fold it, you want to pull back and press with your hand. So just like that. And the reason you want to do that is because your hand is holding it in place, you're pushing it back, you're getting that initial fold, so then you can make a clean fold. So I'll show you guys kind of what I meant. You see how there's kind of not like a clean fold. There's a little bit, it's kind of wonky and bent like that. I take my bone folder, or not quite a bone folder, but you know what I mean. And I just run it along the edge of my page just like this. So right along that fold. And then I'll bring it back. And you guys see that the edges aren't as craggly. They're not as jagged looking. It's a really smooth, nice edge. And that's what you want when you're making books. You want a nice, smooth edge. So I'm going to do the same with my second piece of paper. And what I recommend doing, like I said, is make sure that you measure the width of your paper, because that's going to come into play in a second. So again, I push back. I take my bone folder. That's not quite a bone folder. I'm also vegetarian, so I would probably get a plastic one. You can get plastic as well. The bone is actually just like a really nice material. There's a little bit of a porous nature to it too. It just makes like a really smooth, even fold. So I have the start of my signature. So I have my two pages like this. You can put them together just to see what it looks like. Pretty self-explanatory, just like you would think. And we don't want to do too many pages when we make our signatures. If we did something like 10 pages in one signature, depending on the thickness of the page, it might affect how you sew things together later. So we just want to make sure that there's not too much bulk to this, which can make it a little bit difficult to sew everything together. So we've created our signature, but we need to first pre-make some holes to where we're going to stitch in. And we want to do this, one, because we want to make sure everything is even when we're stitching, but two, it'll make it much easier when we actually stitch those first couple of pages together. So the way that I did mine, I already have, might be hard to see, you might kind of be able to see them. I already pre-pricked, oh, you can totally see. So right there is a hole. So I've already pre-made holes in some of these. And once you get your measurements for your signature out, you won't have to keep remeasuring it. The nice thing is then you can just put your signatures on top of each other and be able to poke a hole through. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna measure really quick. And the way that I measured mine out is it is 6 inches and I want 6 holes. The way that I want my holes to be is you don't want them to be too close to the edge right here because they can rip. So there will be a lot of tension that happens at this point right here, as well as this point at the bottom. So you don't want them to be so close to the edge that they just rip through the edge. So I did 1/2 inch in is where I started mine. So 6 holes total, 1/2 inch in. Like I said, I like this ruler because the size is perfect for it. I recommend when you're making art to have a aluminum ruler with a cork on the bottom. It's really nice for when you're making art. It makes it so that you can, have grip on your page, but this is nice too for doing something on a smaller scale. So I just line up so that it's zeroed out. So the 6 inches on one side, the 0 is on the other. I take my pencil, just like that. Super simple. Measure it out. And I'm doing it at all the half marks. So it's going to be an inch in between, except for that initial mark right there. That'll be a ½ inch into your page. But we're going to do half marks past that point. So it'll be at the 1.5 is where my next hole is at. And then it'll be at 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5. And in between that 5 and 6, there's that half right there. So measured out my pages just like that. What I actually really found was an easier way to do this, though, is I'm going to take a signature I've already made. So once you've made your first signature, you can start doing this. I put it right over top my other pages of my signature. And remember, we talked a signature is a collection of pages. So I unfold it a little bit, but not so much that it breaks the binding, and you can kind of see where the holes are. So what I did for mine, to make this really easy, and to make sure everything lines up, is I put mine on the edge of a table, and make sure to be careful because you will be using a needle, which is of course very sharp. We want it to be sharp so it punctures the page, but we just want to be careful. Normally you use something called an awl for this part. Unfortunately, again, I don't have one. I wasn't able to go out and purchase one. You can pre-prick all of your holes with a needle though, and it works very easily. So I go through here, and I sit it right on the edge of the table like this, so it's just slightly hanging over right there. You guys can kind of see it, because it creates that nice amount of tension right here on the table, and it makes it so I can rest my hand and hold it in place while I puncture. So I want to make sure I puncture all the way through, and then I move on to my next hole. So you'll only have to measure once, and then for the rest of the time, don't worry about measuring. Just make sure everything is lined up before you puncture your holes though. So it should be right there on the seam of your page, because that's where you're going to be stitching from. And we just push through just like that. See? So now we have a completed signature that we have pre-punctured our holes inside of. I have my pre-made stack of signatures that I will be using for this. And the cool thing is too, is after I'm done with these that I'm working on right here, I'm actually going to attach them to my already partially worked on. And the nice thing is too, is once you run out of thread with this, you can actually continue stitching on. So if you've ever sewn anything, hand sewn anything before, it's really just the same. You're tying it off and then attaching it to the next one. So I'm going to show you how to do that initial kettle stitch, and then we're going to do one signature, and that will be the end of our video, but I will post a couple more links so you guys will be able to follow up. You can make a hardcover book from it. You can see how a person who's dedicated their life to being a craftsman and creating books repairs a book, and get to see how much books can mean from people to people. Sometimes it's not even the story that's important, it's the story that's then built around the object, which is really cool. So we're going to get started with our kettle stitching. So what we're going to need is we have our pre-prepared signatures. So I got my little stack right here, all ready to go. I got a clear workspace, so I'm going to move my ruler. I don't need my ruler anymore right now. I don't need my bone folder or my makeup tube. Don't need my pencil, but I have right here an X-Acto knife. I prefer when I'm crafting and cutting, and this is actually something that I got from art school. I prefer an X-Acto knife to anything. If your parents have a box cutter or something like that, you can use it in a similar way, but you have to be very, very careful. They're very sharp. I actually recommend when you start any new project to use a new blade on them, because it gives you a very sharp and clean line. And we really want to take care of our tools when we're creating objects and creating things. So always have a new one. This is a saying from the kitchen, but it applies to this as well. A sharp knife is a safe knife. A dull knife, you're putting too much pressure on and can potentially hurt yourself worse. But with everything sharp, we have to be super careful. So PSA out of the way. I prefer to use an X-Acto blade. You can use scissors for this part because we're really just cutting thread, but I have an X-Acto blade available with me because I used it to cut out my signatures. So to start with, I only recommend doing probably about 2 feet of thread. If you've done a hand sewing project before, any kind of cross stitching, something like that, you'll know that thread can get tangled very easily. So we don't want to be frustrated. We don't want to be dealing with a tangled thread. If you have beeswax or your parents have a beeswax, something like that, you can actually wax your thread and it won't tangle as easily. Kind of like making sure your hair is hydrated, so it doesn't tangle as easily. But we are going to do with this, I have to wet my thread because it's fraying on the end. So if it's fraying on the end, that's okay. Just wet your thread. I just put it in my mouth real quick. And what we're actually going to do is we are going to pull our thread through our needle, just like that. And we're going to line it up. It might be kind of hard to see, but we're going to line it up with the other end, and then we're actually going to tie it off. So I have my thread like that. It's a little bit hard to see. You can use any color. I would recommend white, but if you want to get creative, I have like this really cool rainbow thread that sometimes peeks through the signatures when you're flipping through your book, which is kind of cool. So you'll take your thread just like this. And what we're actually going to do is we're going to tie off the end. So tie the two together, just like you'd be tying your shoes. But we're not going to do a bow. We're going to do a double knot. And so what I actually kind of recommend doing is I knot it a couple of times to get like a nice, a little bit of a bulkier knot so it doesn't pull through that first page when we start our kettle stitch. So we're just going to loop it a couple of times so it gets a little bit more bulk to it. Another one like that. Okay. And I can't see the questions right now, so I don't know if we had any questions, but if we do, I'll be sure to check them afterwards. So I know this is kind of a little bit of fine details. So I have my tied off string, so I tied it on this end like this. See, it's an itty bitty knot, but it hopefully shouldn't pop through when I put it through that first signature. So we're going to start with our kettle stitch. And what we want to do is we're going to stitch our two pages together and then get ready to stitch it to the next signature. So I have my two signatures right here. I will take my needle just like this. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass it through that first signature with your knot on the outside. And we want the knot on the outside so we can trim it down. And if you're putting it in a book, it'll make it so that this part won't be visible when you open your pages. So that knot should be on the outside. So I pull it until the knot is up against that edge, just like that. And I pull it taut. And what that means to pull it taut, it means that there's tension in it. So there's not slack. So it's taut, not slack. We want to make sure that we're having really even stitches that are like tight stitches, not so tight that the pages rip, but taut so that they are keeping everything together really nicely. So what you'll do next, so you've passed it through the back, so your knot should be on the outside right here. And then we have our interior and where our thread has come through the interior. So what we're going to do is we're going to take it like this, and we're actually going to take it and push it through the next hole just like that. And then pull it through just like that. And then make sure we pull it tight. And this is what the inside should look like. So you should have it right there and you can see it. I would do a little bit tighter than that. And I think I'm actually going to add a couple more knots on that initial knot because it keeps pulling through. And we don't want it to do that. We want it to have a nice and tight edge to it. So if your knot keeps coming through, that's okay. You can kind of tug it back through, add a couple more just to make sure it doesn't pop through. There we go. That should be better. There we go. So I've sewn through just like that. You guys can see it's poking out this edge. So what we're going to do next is just go to the next one and sew through the same way. Just like that. Pull it through. You can see that little binding on the outside right there. Just like that. And we can see how it's coming out that edge just like that. So same thing as before. We're going to go to our next hole. Poke it through the next hole just like that. and pull through. And like I said, remember, we want to pull tight, but not so tight that we rip our pages. So just like that. Move on to the next one. Same process. So I'll just do this really quick until we get to the edge. So once we get to the end, just like this, and you guys can kind of see how we have 3 stitches on here, it looks like, and then we also have the 3 on the outside. What we're going to do that's kind of similar to if you're sewing is we're going to go back now. So to make it have a stronger first stitch, we're now going to go back. So I came out this side right here, and now I'm going to go in this side, and it's going to create another stitch right here. So there'll be a stitch on the inside and a stitch on the outside. So let's do that. And same as before, you're just going to go back the other way. And so this is our first signature again. So now we're on the inside. We see that we need to get to the next one. Again, we're just making another stitch, just like sewing. Once you get into the rhythm of it, it's really fun too. When I made my my test block, you know, 30 minutes passed really quickly because it's just kind of like a nice mindless activity. I like to do this kind of stuff, sewing, things like that, when I'm just kind of like, you know, watching a movie or something like that, and I need something to do with my hands. So apologize if you can hear, they are doing some yard work outside at my apartment, so you might hear a weed whip just for a little bit. Hopefully it's not too loud. I apologize. So we're going to loop through again, and now we're finally moving on to the next stage of this. So we're going to sew our next signature onto this, and you guys will kind of see what that process looks like. So I've now got a stitch on the outside and on the inside for all of my stitches. So what I want to do, and this might be a little bit hard to see, I'm going to try to explain it the best I can. So I need my needle to now be on the outside of this, but if I just go directly out, it's going to undo my previous stitch. So this is a technique you're going to have to learn for the rest of this. So we have it like that. What I want to do is take my needle and thread and hook it under this previous stitch, just like that, and pull through. In this way, when I pull my stitch out like this, it'll make it so that it doesn't get rid of that previous stitch I had. Get it to loop it through. I would recommend tying it off, so that's what we'll do. So we loop through just like that underneath, and then we're going to tie it. So we just like if everything else, we're going to loop it through to make a little knot on this portion. In that way, when I pull it through, it's not going to undo my previous stitch. So I'm actually going to, I have some long dangly threads on this outside part. I'm going to cut those off really quick. Close enough that it's not sticking out anymore, but not so close that it can potentially cut the knot that I have. So there's my trimmed edges, and then I've tied my knot on the other side. I am now going to pull through just like this. It should, if it wants to work, do this. Make sure it's even. Make sure we knot it. And pull through the other side. And there we go. Still have my stitch on the outside, still have my stitches on the inside. So we're now going to attach our next signature, which is a little bit different. So what we want to do is we have our first signature here. We're going to take our second stack of 2, our second signature, make sure it's nice and even. Make sure your holes line up perfectly. That looks pretty good. All right, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna sew our next signature on. What I recommend for this step is to have some kind of clip. Have a binder clip, have some kind of clip, whatever works, chip clip, something like that. We're gonna unfold those first pages right here of our signature, so it's right down the center. And on the back end of your pages, you're going to clip it just like that. That way I can flip this up so I can see what's happening with my stitches. And I can hold this in place so that I get a really nice edge to it and make sure that everything stays nice and even. So clip it into place. And we're going to start stitching a little bit differently than we have before. So the first thing we want to do is we want to, if your holes aren't showing up, you can kind of poke through them again. That's what I just did with this. We're going to take our needle and thread, which is already sewn through this. We're going to puncture it into our next signature, into those first 2 holes. There we go. And then pull it through. So it's in those first 2 holes. So you'll have kind of an edge just like that. Do you guys see kind of the stitch edge? Kind of comes through. So what we'll do is we're going to stitch now, just like this, into our next holes going out. So just like we did last time, but this is where things are going to get a little bit different. How we now attach signatures to each other is we're going to take this needle and thread, and you see the first stitches that you have right here. So you have those stitch going in like that. Might be a little hard to see. I'll post a video with a little bit more clarity. But what you're going to do is you're going to take your needle and thread and put it through those 2 stitches right there on your previous signature, on that first signature, so that it comes through just like that on this side. We're going to pull it over now where we have those stitches, and we're going to put it through the other side of those stitches. So you make a loop around your previous signature stitch and then pull it tight. We are now going to go back in the hole we initially came out of. Pull through and pull it tight. Remember, we want to make sure it's taut, but not so tight that we're ripping pages. So just like that. So you make a loop around your previous stitch, and we're going to do it one more time so I can show you guys. And then I'll show you what the finished product looks like. And then you guys will start from there. So again, we're going through our next stitch, our next hole. So I have my first hole, my second hole, my third. I've now gone through my third hole. Again, we're looking and saying, okay, this is where my stitch is. So I got to loop around that stitch. So you start on the left side and put your needle and thread in, and then pull through. And then we go on the right side of that stitch right here, pull through, creates a loop over top, and then we thread it again through those 2. So we pull our needle through, and we've created our stitch just like that. So you'll keep doing this. You'll keep building your signatures on top of each other, adding more and more to them. This is the previous one that I have, so you guys can kind of see how that stitch works. So let's see, what's the best angle? There we go. We can see my initial stitch here. This is the only one that you'll see that stitching on the outside for, is that first stitch you do. You're creating that strong base. After that point, you're going to start to see that you're really just looping it on those previous stitches. So you'll keep looping it through. So you go up on one side, out the other, come back through the same hole you were in. I'll post a video that has really clear instructions on this. So if my video didn't get it across in a way that you guys can understand, I'm a visual learner too. So it helps when I have a little bit more videos to follow up with. So I will post those in the comments. Thank you for joining me today, guys. I hope that you guys can kettle stitch some of your own books. If you are also a fan of making art, I recommend using drawing paper, but not too thick of a drawing paper. I try to use this watercolor paper right here, which, I mean, you can even hear it sounds thicker than something like this. And it didn't work too well. There are other stitching ways you can use for thicker paper, but for a thinner drawing paper like this, it's really nice. If you're using computer paper too, it should be very easy. Once you're done with that, if you can ask a parent if they have a clamp or something in the garage, you can actually clamp your book together, add glue to the spine of it, and then it is ready to put a cover on.